Hello, welcome back to the channel. This is part 3 of our fictional ZX Spectrum promotion, which is celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Specky, as it's affectionately known as, if I can speak today. So in the previous part 2, we created the mostly the icons that you see there, the little cute icons there, very retro looking blocky things. So in this part we'll be actually putting the scene together. So we're going to take these elements that we've got and create a ground and some sort of other elements basically to hold and present all of these bits and pieces into a nice looking presentation. So what we're going to do first is just tidy up a couple of bits and pieces. So as you saw, I've just resized the word Spectrum to be the same width roughly as the ZX letters. And now I'm going to take these icons and shift them up away from where the ground's going to sit basically. So let's add a plane. So Shift A to add an object, or use the menu at the top. Let's scale that up to 6 times its size, and we'll move the text up above the ground. So we're just preparing now, giving ourselves some space to start working and putting together a suitable foundation of presentation really. So let's start off with the idea I have here is a kind of like a tubular type of object where the ZX Spectrum, I'm not going to call it a logo, something, element is going to sit kind of at the top of that, and then just be kind of the cylinder shape would be like a base basically. So add the cylinder, and I'm going to edit mode by pressing tab, select the top and bottom faces. So press 3 on your numpad to get into face mode. Excuse me. Select those faces and just create an inset by pressing I. And then we can delete those faces because we don't need them. As I say, we want to make a tube kind of shape. And select the 2 edge loops at the top and bottom. And if you right click, you can select Bridge Edge Loops, which is built right into Blender. It's not an add-on. And there you go. We can just spin that around freely to have a look at it. That's looking good. Just tweaking the size now, because once you've got this simple shape, it's very easy to change the width of the tube area and the height and all that kind of thing. So we'll just pull it down a little bit and see how we feel about it really. So at this point, unless you've got unless you're working off a sketch, like a concept sketch or a rough idea of what you want to do, you're kind of making this up as you go along, basically. So you know when it's right, when you feel it, when you know it looks good and you've done enough work on it to think, yeah, that's enough. I can move on to something else now. So what I've done there is I created an edge loop with Control R and created a smaller base there at the bottom, just to give it a bit of interest really. And it also looks a bit more sturdy, right? It's not going to topple over, so that always helps. A bit more believable. And don't worry that it looks blocky at the moment. We're going to add a subdivision surface modifier to that and smooth shade it, and also tighten up some of those edges that the subdivision modifier will inevitably soften far more than we'd like. So as you can see there, that initial base that I made that large initially, I've now pulled it back in, and yeah, I mean, this is what you do, right? You just kind of feel your way through this and decide, okay, that works fine there, but maybe I still want the large base at the bottom, so we'll lift all of the geometry up off the ground let's just rename that plane to floor so we know what it is in our outliner. And now that we've done that, I can select, hold down Alt and click on those edge loops there, sorry, face loops, and just delete those. We don't need those. Just extra geometry we don't need to worry about, because we really want that edge loop there. And now we've got that, we can just extrude it by pressing E, right click to leave it in place, and then press S to scale. And then as you can see, we scaled it out there back to that original larger base at the bottom, and it then extruded that same edge down to the ground. Of course, another way you could do that is just create the cylinder shape and add a multitude of edge loops along its height, and then just extrude the edge rings out. I keep calling it edge rings, face rings out from there. There's many ways you could do this. And there's one technique that I like here, and this is the shear. So in Edit, I've selected those top faces, and we're going to use the shear tool, which I think is really cool. And you imagine someone's just cut right through that, and the top bit's just been lobbed off. And I think that looks really nice. I like that. It lends itself to presenting towards the camera. It's like you've tilted something down in your hands, and you're tilting it forward and down to show to somebody, hey, this is what I've got, this is what it is. And that's how I feel about this base. Its purpose is just to present the ZX Spectrum text. So I've added edge loops here, but then I'm going to delete them because I want to have, within that loop of running around the ring, I want a border around the edges, the inner and the outer edge. So I'm going to add quite a few edge loops there. And I don't need all the ones in the middle, I just want the outer ones to keep separate. So I'll delete those edge loops, and then I can add 3 edge loops, and that will divide that central area into 4 rings. Why 4? Because we've got 4 colors that we've used in the logo. So we can apply those colors to each of those rings on that base. At the moment, of course, we've only got one material, being the color of the red one, and that's going to be applied to everything. But as we add more materials, it will diversify a bit more. So that's the red, the yellow, and next we'll add I believe it was green. See, I'm thinking twice now, which color was it, the green or the cyan? It's definitely the green. And then finally we'll add the cyan. And hit assign, of course, don't forget to do that. So now we're just left with all of this red that we don't need to have all over this object. So we select those edge loops there, I keep calling them edge loops, face loops. And again, hold down the Alt key and then hold down Shift Alt to select multiples of those face loops. And with that selected, we'll add another material. At this point, anything will do, as long as we've got it separated from the other materials, that's fine. So I added the joystick black, which we created back in part 2, and we didn't use it in the end. Now that looks quite cool as it is, actually faceted, but we are going to make it a little bit more soft and rounded. So with that done, let's bring up the ZX Spectrum copy and try and find a good placement for that, because we want to be able to read the copy, the Spectrum words, without the cylinder obstructing the copy. So just tweak it as you feel is necessary. There's no science to this really. I tend to just jump into Blender and have an idea, usually just in my head, not on paper, and just go with it and just see how I feel, go with the flow. Yeah, subdivision surface modifier, lovely, and of course it's going to smooth everything, which we don't want. So we're going to use a technique here where we select some edge loops this time, not faces, some edge rings, and we're going to target just those edges and stiffen them up a little bit. So we use the mean bevel weight attribute there in the sidebar. Hit the N key to bring up the sidebar, and under the item tab at the bottom you see mean bevel weight, and give them a value of 1. And that way we can use the bevel modifier and use the limit method weight to target just by weight, and anything with a 1 and anything between a 0 and a 1 is going to have some influence from that bevel modifier. Just going to zoom in here so we can see how that's working for us. We'll just make it a little bit smaller. We just want these edges to work in the way that they help to catch the light or lights in the scene and create these nice edge highlights. And you can see that effect just there at the base. A little bit, it's looking really nice. And you can see there the highlights and some of the shading going on. Of course, if you don't want to use the weight method and the bevel modifier, you could just use the same selection of those edges and bevel them with Control B and add, physical cuts into your model. Obviously, it's more destructive that way, and you have less control if you wanted to change anything later on. So what we're doing now is looking at this joystick black material, which obviously isn't going to be called joystick black for this, so we're going to duplicate that material by hitting that little file icon and renaming it to base. And we're going to delete some of these nodes, we don't need them, get rid of the mixed node and just have the principled BSDF and plug that into the surface. So it's a standard node shader at this point, or shader should I say. So what I'm doing here is adding obviously a Voronoi texture. I thought about maybe using a noise texture, I might still do that, but the idea is to plug that into the roughness, and that'll break up the uniform reflectivity of the surface. Now it's important you have Node Wrangler enabled, so if you don't do that, by all means go into your preferences and under add-on search for Node or Wrangler and enable that, because with holding down Control Shift and then clicking on a node in the shader editor, you will see what that node actually looks like without the influence of other nodes in that shader group. As you can see there, it's an excellent way of looking at what that node is doing. And to go back to the principled BSDF, just do the same thing, Control Shift and click it. So with that done, I've tweaked some of the values in that noise texture now, which is I've replaced the Voronoi and added a color ramp between the noise texture and the roughness slot. And the reason for that, the color ramp is one you're going to use a lot, it gives you more control over the noise texture and how it's looking. So you can push the blacks up or bring the whites down or up, depending how you look at it. So you can see that I'm dragging the black marker along to the right, and it's anything that's dark is being amplified effectively. So, and remember with roughness, black and white equals, without this node having anything in it, you've got a zero value of, a range of 0 to 1, right? So 0 is no roughness effectively, so it's very smooth and it will be a mirror finish. A value of 1 on the opposite side will give you a very matte finish. So by using this noise texture, we're going to mix that up, and have this kind of broken up roughness across the surface, and you can see it there working. So I brought the black value up to like a grey instead, because we don't want a mirror finish on parts of that model. We want it to be partly rough and partly smooth, and get a good balance between the two. Obviously play around with these values to your liking, because you can change the scale as I'm doing here, the detail, the roughness value. If you even distortion, use the distortion value there, but that's going to make it look more swirly and more liquidy. Liquidy? I just made that word up. Just seeing here if metallic is good for that look. Clear coat maybe, that's always quite nice. Gives it like another layer of lacquer, effectively, polish, which is separate to roughness. And that's got its own roughness value, as you can see there, clear coat roughness. So really good for things like car paint materials or very polished surfaces that may have multiple layers. but just be aware it does add more render time to your output, so something to bear in mind. So with that done for now, we can always go back to it later. These coloured rings around the top of the base, I'm duplicating each of these colours basically and stripping it back to a basic node. And all we want to do is make this an emission. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. So now we have no shading on that at all. It's purely an emitted colour. I'm going to set that roughness back to default 0.5. Doesn't really make much difference when it's emitting. At least I can see it anyway. I could be wrong. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong there. So I'll speed this up because it's the same thing for all four of those colours. So select each one, duplicate it, rename it to something else, like emit, so you know what it is, and strip them all back down to their basic shader nodes. And there you go. We've got this nice glowing ring of colours there now at the top. It's looking lovely. And if we bring the floor back in, we can see how that kind of looks as we're working through it. And at this point, the floor actually uses the same material as that base, so that's probably not the best idea in the void, but we'll see if this works. So I've turned the clear coat off and on again to see how that kind of works, or how I feel about it. So you get a very clear reflection there. As I said, the clear coat roughness is very low, almost zero, so it becomes like a mirror finish. As you can see, if you bring that up to 0.2, it's a very different look. As you can tell, I'm not really sure at this point whether I should keep that as is or just change it for something else. But as you go along, you'll find the right setting and the right thing to do. On balance, once you get more stuff, as you build up more of the scene and start adding lights, you'll start to recognise areas for improvement. You probably noticed that I kind of look around a lot and pivot around the scene, and I think you'll probably find everyone does that. And it doesn't matter which tutorial you've seen on YouTube, but the difference here, at least for me anyway, is I don't really cut all that out. Yes, it might be a little bit boring for you guys, but again, it's just the process that I go through, and I guess every designer goes through as they're working in Blender. And you're kind of just evaluating, is there something I've missed? Do I need to tweak anything? How does it look from this angle, that angle? And get a good feel for it. So with that said, let's position our camera. And I'm using a camera look at technique where all that is very simple. You add an empty, like anything you want. It could be a cube, it could be an axis, and place that where you want your camera to look. And I can see it in the outline. I've called it camera look at. So that's exactly what it's for. And then you select the camera and go to I forget what the icon is. The one just above the camera icon on the right hand side there, and you select track 2. And from there you can select the target to be the camera look at, and your camera will snap what it's looking at to that empty. So you can move around the empty, and your camera will basically follow it, look at it all the time. So it's a very precise way of getting the camera to look exactly where you want it to. So let's start working on these icons. I don't know why I'm calling them icons, but they look like icons. So what we want to do is, the idea I've got now is I want to populate at the foot of the base, these icons. So it looks like someone's just, dropped them there or placed them there intentionally. But they look random enough to be believable and not just standing there in midair without any rhyme or reason. So the tedious part is, of course, that all sounds great, but you have to manually adjust and place them, angle for angle, and you want them to be, as I said, believable. So this is a very tedious process, but well worth the result, I think. I've done this multiple times in the past, and I really love that result of just making it look random and a bit more human, relatable. So I'm just going to randomly place these roughly where I want them to be. And it's going to be very different to the final result, but again, this is step one. And it's important to switch to the camera view to see how that looks from that angle. And the reason I do that is because if you rotate an object, too far, you just may not see that object at all anymore clearly enough to know what it is. It could be anything totally random. Just having a look at the some of the properties here on the right hand side. And so here we are. This is the pane that we have to go through. So I'm going to start manually placing these one by one. So I switched to local view for the manipulators. That way I don't lose the orientation of the axes on it, from the point of view of the object. And that gives me a little bit more control over placing it rather than using the global. So what you're looking for here is you want to avoid intersections, basically, as if it was in the real world. Things just don't slip through other things. So you want to make sure it's sitting on the ground, excuse me, but at the same time you don't want it to be just floating, against something that should be resting. So you may need to zoom in quite a bit to get that result that you're after. So once I'm happy with the height of it, again, I'll have a look around and see how I feel about it, and then start working on the next one. And hi there, someone's just dropped in, literally. And the reason for that is because this is the part where you're just thinking over and over again, where should I put this? How should I rotate it? Which angle should it be? And this can be and is a tedious process, as I said. So, but likewise, it's worth the result. So persevere, don't be put off. It's actually good fun as well, to be fair. I do enjoy this because I know the results are gonna, hopefully be worth it. I hope you agree. Another way you could do this is to use physics, of course, but then you have less control over where they fall and how they sit and all sorts. So whilst it may look more arguably realistic, you may not get the result that you're actually after. So that's why you go to this manual process instead. Or maybe you're just a control freak. So there is that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, so that's looking good. I think that looks alright. That'll do for now. I'm going to move these around and tweak them once you get them in place and start looking to the camera again. So let's play with our little Space Invader now. We'll put him at the front because he's quite an important icon and very recognisable. So we'll put him centre stage almost. Now I'm thinking that this would be, have different angles to the other icons. So maybe it's not on the same level as the other ones. So I'll place that on the ground rather than the platform. And as you saw, I didn't mention it, but I split the window earlier on so I can have an orthographic view on this side, so I can check the level or any interaction with the floor. And I'm trying to get those 2 points, the lower points, lined up, because you wouldn't just have an object floating on a single point. It's very unbelievable. So if you have both points, you've got some rational foundation for, yes, that would work in real life. So continue tweaking this. It's actually resting on the controller there. Again, probably not very realistic, to be honest, but as long as it looks believable. And as I'm doing this, there's other things I'm looking at is, are these recognizable? Can I still read the shapes that I'm placing? As I said earlier, if you have two in acute angle, you then lose the silhouette of the shape that you created, so there wasn't much point in doing all that work in the first place. Let's work on the star and put it on this side. Now I'm thinking here that I can lie this down more horizontal than the other ones. So initially I laid it flat completely, so I reset the rotation on the x-axis and put it on the ground. Now that's fine from this angle, in the viewport, but how does that look from the camera angle? Can we still see a star? Not really. So yeah, that's quite lost there, so I think we'll just tweak that some more. It definitely needs some rotation on it too. So let's prop it up on this platform here and see if that works better. So here I'm looking at the ground and the platform and seeing an equal level of interaction to see if it's balanced. Yes, that's touching the ground. Just got to look at the back of it now and see if that's going through the base. Just turn the floor off. Yeah, we've got a little bit of clip in there, so we'll make a tiny adjustment. I think that's still clipping. And move it up just a tiny bit. Probably need to bring the floor back now because we've made an adjustment, so we need to check whether that helps. And as you saw, I just turned on the shadow feature in the drop down there under the shading options. So that the shading options are the four circular icons in the top right of every viewport. The shadow really helps to kind of place things in this 3D scene. So with that done, let's move on to the ghost. Yeah, I know the star isn't quite done, but we are going to duplicate these. We're not going to just have one star, we're going to create a few copies of them, and the others will be in different places and different orientations. So, but let's get these initial ones done first. We'll put this little guy on this side now because it's a little bit lonely over there. So same process, minor rotations, some translations. The cool thing I like about the local view is once you've found it hits the back of something, you can then just use the up and down axis to move it up and down without affecting its forward and backwards, if you like. Which wouldn't happen with global view. Sorry, which would be a problem in global view. Global axis, I guess. So let's just tweak that a little bit. There we go. That's just on the platform now. And we're going through that a little bit, so we'll just move it just a little bit out. And by doing that, it's kind of rotated the feet of that ghost, if you can call those feet. course they're not feet, are they? It's just a sheet. So yeah, that's looking okay. Sometimes it helps to look through the underside of your objects just to see if they're coming through, like breaking through the other side. Actually, it's easier to see that sometimes that way than the normal way. And here comes the last icon, the heart. So we'll bring that in. And again, I'm going to try and lie this one a little bit more flat. Make it a little bit more random. Let's see if it works here. Feel free to fast forward the video at this point, because I probably should have done that myself, but I didn't. Sorry about that. But yeah, you get the point now anyway. You just place these manually and to your liking, see how you feel about it. And once you're happy, you can move on to the next stage. But for now, enjoy the music and we'll let this play out. This one's a bit tricky actually, because we've got a rotation on all axes, so yeah, making one adjustment on one axis will affect all of the other ones. So there's a lot of tweaks on this one, more than I'd like. And of course it's gone through on the other side now, so we've got to rotate it on that axis as well. And that looks okay. Yeah, so you can see, you get a general feel now of how that kind of looks, as if those are just randomly placed. And as you can see there, I'm not happy with how you can't recognise the heart shape. You can barely recognise the star shape. So after all of that, we're going to move that to this side and give it a much more upright look, so we can get more readability, if you like, out of the shape. There we go. Let's switch that over to rendered view now, in the camera view, from the camera perspective. You can see it now, you can see the heart shape is much more readable as that object that we made, which is great. As you probably saw there, I do have depth of field turned on the camera. So I also have motion blur on, so we turn that off and turn off depth of field for now. Let's make some minor adjustments to the camera angle. I think we're just going to lift off, well, lift off, it's not a rocket, is it? I'm going to lift up the camera a little bit and try and get a bit more visibility on those icons, I guess. And that'll do for now, so I'll speed this up a bit for you, this part up for you, because what we're going to what I'm going to do now is copy these icons and place more of them around, basically at the foot of the base. So exactly the same process, and it may seem like it takes a while, but it really doesn't. Before you know it, it's only a few minutes for each one, and before you know it, you're done. So another idea with these icons is not to have them like this, of course, and there's many ways you could have used these icons. You could have had them floating around in the air around the base. That would have been quite nice. Not even had a floor at all. You could have just had those rings with the emission on them and have that floating in the air. So that would have been rather nice as well, actually. And a lot easier to do, I think, as well. So getting back to the base, I'm going to add an inner floor to that shape. So I selected the edge there with holding down Alt, and then press F to fill or create a face, and then hit I to inset. And then with that same edge, add the mean bevel weight, so that the bevel modifier targets that as well. And we just add another edge loop there just to tighten that up a little bit more. The reason we're doing that is because once I just move this up a little bit off the floor, is so that we can add a light inside there as well. You may not need the floor, but I was thinking, well, I can use the floor as an emission and see how that works. If it doesn't work, then we can add a light instead inside there that's going to be hidden from camera, and see how that looks. So I'm thinking we can get like an underlight under the logo. So here I'm thinking about how the floor looks, and I mean ideally you might not want to be doing this so soon because we haven't got lights in here yet. We're using the HDRI that's built into Blender to preview our scene. So I think I decided just to skip that bit again and just focus more on the base. I also separated that, by the way. So that with that last face selected, you can right click and do separate or split if you select the edge. And if you've got the face selected, you can press P and separate by selection. And that way I can move it up independently without dragging all of the other geometry up with it. You can see I've added the emission there to that face. And there you go, it just made the bottom of that logo a little bit brighter. So I'll raise that up a bit more. So the effect I'm trying to get is the inside wall of that cylinder, that tube. I want to see the light coming off that. So instead of, or as well as, I've added an area light, which I've made into a rectangle as the shape. And it's effectively a strip light. So we're going to add that inside there and point it towards the back of the wall. So let's turn the power down. And let's see if we can find a good place for that. And change the colour to something a bit more fitting for the theme. And turn the power up again because we changed the colour and that's sucked away some of the power of the light. It's actually quite bright in there. And also created a new material there called Base Emit. So let's look at the Space Invader. And we've got the material that we created before. We've got the controller. So what I'm doing now is I'm just playing around with some of the colours because I felt as though some of those shapes are a little bit lost or don't stand out enough. So again, trying to think about readability, recognising shapes easily. It seems appropriate to make the ghost red, you know, and yeah, just work through that and just pick the colours that you like, but obviously fit within the theme that you're working to. So just making some minor tweaks here because I felt as though I was hiding too much of the controller shape. So for me, again, I found it a little bit too hard to read. It wasn't obvious enough, so just play with the placement of the Space Invader a little bit. I think that's better, we can see the whole controller now, literally. So let's carry on duplicating these icons and placing them around. Now this is all purely by accident. I didn't plan on having the ghost like showing through the floor, but as I was doing this I thought that's what, you know, a ghost can do, that it can go through, you know, solid objects. So why not put that into coming up to the floor and you get the eyes just showing like cheekily above the floor. And I made it a different colour because I felt as though the green and the blue, obviously, the red and the blue don't work well together. So I made it, gave it the green colour instead. So what I'm doing now is I'm copying these objects. And by the way, when you copy these objects, don't use Shift D. Don't create a duplicate, create an instance of them. The reason being that firstly, instances cost nothing in terms of performance and rendering, whereas duplicates will cost you more, and because you physically more geometry and different objects that are unique. And also, if you change one of them, the others will follow suit as well. Think of it as modeling CSS. So here I've created another colour for the additional object. sorry, I'll take that back. I didn't create another colour, just tweaking some of the values. And now we're just tweaking the floor noise texture. And the reason we're placing these other icons nearer towards the camera is so that we can convey more depth. You know, if someone's looking at this, they can think, okay, that's going into the image, and I can see they can relate better. So just expand the floor out and take that back edge, extrude it upwards, select the corner edge, press Ctrl B to bevel it, scroll the mouse wheel to create more cuts in your corner, in your bevel, and you get that nice infinity wall that photographers love. And at this point I felt like we could add a ring of light at the base of that, and the reason being we can maybe try to lift those icons a bit more, make them a bit more visible, highlight them a bit more. So I added some edge loops here. I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit, add some controlling edge loops as well, like that there. And then we'll add another strip of light there. I think in hindsight, one strip of light would have been enough. You know, we don't really need two. So now it's a process of adding more lights. And I want to try and highlight the background rather than just having it fade to black. So give it a nice colour. And this time I used the area light with a disc shape this time. I must admit I found this process a little bit frustrating, to be honest, because I wasn't getting the result I expected to get from these lights hitting that surface. So I'll speed the video up, and basically you just see me moving around lights and trying to use a spotlight instead of an area light, or as well as an area light, changing the different colors, changing the power. But what I'm looking for is the highlight behind the base. So it becomes like a backlight effectively. It creates a stronger shape for the foreground elements. I don't think that material on the floor is actually pretty, it's not good enough. And I think that's just thrown me off. So we'll probably fix that. In fact, we will fix that later on. I think that just contributed to the whole frustration factor at this point about why isn't this light looking good. I think that roughness material I've got there, which looks a bit cloudy, is not really helping. I think sometimes it's just best to work off a basic material, a neutral material, and get your lights working that way, and then you can start adding your materials, or turning them on at least anyway. So I'm adding more lights and making tweaks to some of the angles of the ghost there, as you just saw. And these lights are pointing towards, they're off camera and they're pointing towards the main subject, and the reason for that is because I want these edge highlights or rim lights or whatever you want to call them. But I need to separate the background from the foreground, so adding lights will obviously help with that. So place them to your liking, try different strengths, different colours. In fact, I think compared to the other stuff I've done like this, I think this is probably the longest it's taken me to get these lights to where I want them to be. And I try not to use too many lights either, because the more you lights you have, the less control you have, and you just want to keep it as simple as possible. And that's looking okay, but I'm not really happy with that just yet. So going back to the base material, I'm going to make some tweaks to the roughness again, get a bit more detail in there. Just play around with the detail level, some of the roughness again. And that's looking better, I think, a little bit more metallic. Alternatively, you can just download a metallic shader group, not shader group, a texture set from something like CC0 Textures or polyhaven.com, and try that as well. Just apply that to the model. So again, with the the lights, I'm using a target track to process technique, so that I can have more control over where the light is actually pointing without having to rotate it and do it manually. All I have to do is move the empty. And once you place the lights, you then find that, okay, I don't quite have enough light on this area. In this case, the ghost icon there, so I made a slight tweak to the angle. Sometimes you want to do that just to catch the highlights, catch the light. Other times you want to tone it down because it's drawing too much attention. So going back to the light in the background again, which I kind of left earlier on, making some tweaks again there. And then tweaking the floor texture again. As you can see, I'm not quite happy with that. Change it to object, and that seemed to help quite considerably actually. So I don't normally change the specular value on a shader, but in this time I did, which can help just to dull down some of those highlights. So what I'm looking for here is how the light is hitting the object, and maybe it's creating too many highlights, that strong highlights to blow, clipping highlights, that kind of thing. So move them around, rotate them, play with them. And I've duplicated that spotlight, and the reason for that is because if you look behind the ZX Spectrum on to the more extreme left and right, there's not enough light, it's literally black. So I want to have a bit more silhouette to the shape. So by adding these lights in the background, I can create more of a contrast with the main subject. And I copied the ghost again, and trying to place that there further away in the background. You can see there the slight angle turn. It made such a difference to how the light how it interacts with the light. Just looked way too bright. And in context, you don't want something to be shouting at you like that, because it's not important, right? You don't need to be looking at that object. You want the viewer to focus on the main element. So same thing again, just create another instance of the ghost and placing somewhere else, a bit random, at different depths as well, and that helps to again sell the depth angle. And going back to the camera, I've turned depth of field back on again now. Just play around with the focal length and use this focal length of 70 at this point. Change it to 60mm instead of 70 now. And I've changed the size of the canvas effectively, and the reason I did that is because we're rendering to a specific kind of template or size, if you like, for the final composition in Photoshop. So if I allow myself a larger bleed area, I've got more flexibility in how I place that within the canvas in Photoshop. So it's something that I do a lot actually. Sometimes I render at 6,000-7,000 just by giving it a lot more space around the subject. But it can be tricky because it kind of tricks your camera into not tricks it, but you then have to change the focal length, and then you start losing some of the effect that you built up. So it's finding that right balance and whatever you feel is the right thing. So at this point, just tweaking the placement of some of these objects, and again tweaking the background, spotlights hitting that back wall. You can see that I'm frantically making extreme movements because then you can see the effect straight away. Now, does it work or not? Yes or no? So if you spin it away and then bring it back quickly, you will notice a difference. And that helps to kind of pinpoint where you're going wrong or right. In your own version, of course, you don't have to have the background there like that. You can just have it as a natural floor, maybe create a wall section, or just have a flat wall completely and avoid the ground altogether, and have the icons floating around. That will also look really good. You could also add some animation to those icons, so perhaps stick them on a curve or group them to an empty and just spin them round a few frames and turn motion blur on the camera, and that will give you a nice bit of movement. Those icons. Let's pull the camera in a bit more. So we don't want to have, width wise we want that space, but height wise we don't need as much space, so we can pull that in a bit more. Just tweak the height a little bit. I'm going to move the empty, which is the target for the camera, just to center the scene a bit better. So I'm really trying to think ahead here, can I use this in Photoshop? Do I have enough to work with? Do I need to be further out, closer in, and so on. So what I'm doing now is I'm adding these point lights because I kind of felt that it needed something behind the icons now, just to help them add a bit more. But not just them, but also the ceiling at the base of that. Let's just give it a little bit more light and shadow. Plus we have the ring of light, so that kind of goes with the whole idea of this thing's emitting light. And so we're just emphasizing that by using actual lights, as well as the strip light there. And you can see we're getting these nice rays of light, if you like, breaking in between the empty space of the icons and hitting the ground. So we changed the color of these lights as well, something a bit more yellowy, I guess orange, to that's more in line with the light going around the base. And turn the power down to, oh no, I've put 5 in there, see if that works, how that works. Just playing around with the radius now, to get it to the point where I'm happy with how it looks. Of course, this is all very subjective. Do what you feel is right for you and what works for your scene. So we'll duplicate that and move it behind another one. just looking in between those, you know, trying to get the camera angle so I can see that I'm not actually inside the object or another object. So copy that again and place it in between these and work your way around. And that looks about right. And that inner one that we added earlier, the strip light inside the tube, became visible. So we lifted up the camera angle, so now we could see the strip light. So we're going to move that down, maybe tweak the size a little bit. But I'm really liking that kind of underlight glow that's coming out from there now. Again, copying some of these icons, placing them, scattering them around randomly, seeing what feels right, what looks good. It's so much easier putting them on the ground than trying to place them around the base. So what I like about placing them in the foreground is they become they act as leaders that lead, well, I can't say that probably, but they lead your eye into the main subject. So, and obviously we have depth of field turned on as well, so these will be blurred out quite a bit, so you can't focus on them, but literally, but it just helps to give a bit more depth and focus to the main element. So I'm just moving them around the scene now, trying to find the space where they should be. Just tweaking some render parameters here. So I've got quite a large samples right there for the render. Probably far too much when we've got denoising as well, which is excellent, of course. And now, having done all that, we want to see a bit more of the logo, a bit more dramatic. So I'm just playing around with rotating it there, rotating that group, that empty. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty neat. I think it's a bit more dramatic when it's tilted up like that. We're very close now. I think we're almost there. So this is the kind of thing that this is the kind of concept that I had in mind when I first started this, and I think my initial idea was to have these icons floating around, but then I thought, you know what, I'll just go with the whole placing them around the base. So let's do a quick render. Just speed that up, and there we go. So that's looking pretty cool. Looking at it 100%, just see how that looks, anything that stands out that shouldn't be there. So guys, thanks for joining me in this video, and join me in part 4 and the final part, because that's going to be a very short video, contrary to this one, where we jump into Photoshop and take this render, put it into our PSD file, and add a few finishing touches to create the final image. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll let the video play out. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, or consider doing so. It really helps me out, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.